Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour, where amateurs, hobbyists, and professional photographers meet to connect, inspire, and create. My guest speakers share their images, tips and techniques, and a little bit of inspiration to help you move your photography forward. The schedule for our upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com. And if you can't join us live, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll be notified when a new session is added. Tonight's guest is Angela Maloney. A couple of years ago, Angela found herself with a lot of free time, and she returned to photography to find something to fill her day and give herself a creative purpose. I found her website, theplacechangesme.com, quite by accident, and her story drew me in because I too believe that what we see and how we photograph something can impact how others look at the world. In tonight's presentation, How to Go Wow, Sense of Wonder Photography, Angela is going to introduce us to the world through her eyes by sharing some of her images that will inspire you to look at the world in front of you just a little differently. If you're on Instagram, look for her at The Place Changes Me, and please visit her website at theplacechangesme.com. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Angela.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here. I have to tell you, when Linda reached out and asked me about sharing on Linda Nickell's Happiness Hour, I was a little bit concerned because I looked at that and I said, well, I don't know that I can limit my happiness to just 1 hour. But be that as it may, we will try for an hour and then maybe to be continued. So let me go ahead and start the screen share here. So yes, how to go wow, sense of wonder photography. And when I sent this topic suggestion over to Linda, I sent it off and then I went, gee whiz, I've set a really high bar for myself here. But be that as it may, what I've found is that I get asked all the time, what is your specialty in photography? And I don't know that I necessarily fit a specific category very well, but sense of wonder is my specialty. And sometimes if I'm feeling more glib, I'll say, I specialize in things that interest Angie. Either way, it's pretty much the same. And just to give you a little bit of the how and the why I found myself doing this, like it says on the slide in the beginning, I bought a camera. That was in about August or September of 2001. It was my very first digital camera. You're seeing a photo that I took in September 2001 on that camera. So it's one of the very first digital photos I ever took. So don't judge it too harshly. The stuff that's hopefully good is coming up later. But I sort of embarked right there on that process of carrying it around. I found it was pretty much always with me every time I went anywhere. And so I always had it, and I would take a bunch of snapshots. And this one was taken down at one of the Smithsonian museums. And I'm realizing I put the wrong date on the slide. It was actually taken in January 2002. But that is a group of Buddhist monks. And after the 9/11 attacks, which hit DC and New York, I was new in town at the time, but I was here for them. And the group of Buddhist monks decided that what they would do is they would create a mandala, which is a very detailed sand painting. And then once you create it, you destroy it. And it's designed to emphasize the ephemeral nature of things. And it's, in this case, specifically meant as a gesture of healing for the DC area. So still a very early photo and still, really taking snapshots. But once in a while, I started getting better. This is another camera later. This is January 2016. Ravana Falls is a waterfall in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is one of those places that just about nobody from the US has been. In fact, I walked up, I was walking on a beach and I walked up to this gentleman who is obviously a tourist, and he asked me where I was from. And I told him I was from the US. And he goes, "What are you doing here? You have Hawaii." Well, at the time, I was a Foreign Service officer, a US diplomat, and I was posted in Chennai, India, which is about an hour flight away. So I was just checking out nearby places to go visit. And then he says to me, "You see what's happening with Russia, and just watch. I'm from Poland, and Poland is next." And I started to open my mouth and say, I'm the wrong person to tell. You need to tell somebody who can actually do something about that. And then I realized, wait a second, actually, I am the right person to tell. So that's the life of that type of work. So we got to see the world. And again, camera always with me. I enjoyed capturing the images. I have heard that this one is too blue in the water and it looks unnatural, but I've got to tell you, the water on the coast of Sri Lanka over there is actually that color. It is amazingly beautiful water. And if you are like me, you live in mid-Atlantic states, you see the water here, it's kind of more grayish as a rule. It's a very different color over there. And unfortunately, that resulted in my getting hurt. I got hurt serving overseas in India. And unfortunately, as Linda mentioned, this became a career-ending disability. And, I try not to make it obvious, but the fact of the matter is I'm one of these people that just writing my name can be very challenging. So you can imagine PowerPoint presentation today was several days in the making, and that's the way it goes. But I ended up medically retired, and so that left me with the problem of I used to be thinking about what I could do to solve problems or to help solve problems or at least manage problems overseas, and about things like, I probably would have been one of the people involved in working in the Ukraine situation right now, because Soviet Union or former Soviet Union relations with the former Soviet republics, Russian relations, was one of my areas. So I had 3 of my friends approach me over the course of a single weekend, and they swear they did not coordinate it. One of them is here today, and that's Sarah Minka. So thank her. And they approached me, and all 3 of them had the same request, that I write a book of my photos. And of course, if someone comes up to you and says that to you, then there's only one proper response, and that is to tell them that they are crazy, which is pretty much what I said. There is no way that my images warrant publication. I hadn't even handled a camera in about 4 years at that point because of my wrists, and I wasn't sure that handling a camera was even an option. But I got to thinking about it, and I remembered I used to always take my camera with me. I have over the years paid, I don't know how many thousands of dollars to go and explore. And, the one bright side of my situation, I do get a pension, so money is not, an immediate worry. I'm okay there. So still got to do something, still got to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And so I started picking up photography and actually trying for the first time in my life. And it's been interesting to see what's happened there. I kind of sometimes feel like Vivian Meyer, if you know her, because I just started last year, and all of a sudden to give you an idea of stuff that's coming up. In addition to this, at the end of this month, Tamron is publishing a fine art newsletter featuring me. And then my first international publication is in October. That's another interview of me by a website called She Snaps. And it's a little bit mind-blowing, if I'm frank. I've taken most of the summer off. I've had some health issues, and it's also made a good time to just stop and kind of collect my thoughts. So I will have a few images that I've taken over the summer that have not been widely shared that will be here. I always like to talk about what I do. And if you ever see me on social media, you'll hear me say this over and over and over. You know, what I'm trying to do is not to take photos of things, it's to take photos about things. And let me just remove that little circle here by going to the next slide. And this is a good example of what I mean when I say that. And I have a couple of those queued up. This is obviously a photo of a maple tree in the fall. I think pretty much everybody knows that. But what's it about? Well, what it's about is the color orange. And that's meant to pop out. And if somebody looked at this and said, "Oh, that's a nice maple tree," I would probably be disappointed, because I want them to look at that and go, "Wow, that's on fire." Or, "My gosh, look at that pop." So this is actually the very first image on my website. And it's the image that I keep coming back to when I talk about this idea of photos about things rather than photos of things. I queued up a couple more just to talk about the point a little bit further. This is obviously a completely different genre. This is street photography, and one of the interviewers was trying to pin me down on a genre that's, a more recognized genre. And, the problem I've had that's been a lifelong problem is that, we live in a very specialized world and I'm interested in everything. And finally, the interviewer said, "Well, it's just like you're a photographer of the world." I said, "Yes, there you go. That's it. That's how I think of it." And of course, human beings are part of the world. And this is an image taken up an alley of a guy who is meant to look very scary. And I hope that you won't tell him I did that to him, because in fact, he's a restaurant employee who was just taking out the trash. But it was about the image, the message, and the idea of communicating something about what that could feel like to be in that environment. And by the way, I was not down the alley. I was standing outside of it at the, I guess the place where the alley joins the street, whatever you would call that. And then one last one, and I want to emphasize, I'm going to show an image from a protest here. When I do protest photography, I am just there to take the photo. I do not endorse any particular view. I am not showing you this to endorse any view. I'm just showing you this to underscore that idea of photos about things. And the reason I picked this one is because it's actually a fairly bad photo from a technical perspective. The photo is in the rear, or excuse me, the focus is in the rear. And we've got these two gentlemen whose faces are blurred. And they've got the sign there saying "Stop the Vaccine Holocaust." From a technical perspective, this is not a very good photo. But one of the things that I found myself thinking about as I was thinking, okay, so what am I going to try and do here, is that nobody ever talks about how they remember a great master photographer because of that person's focus, or because that person always got the exposure right. Nobody has ever said Ansel Adams' photos were just the best because they were always in focus. No, there's something more to it than that. And it's something about the way that it moves people. It's about the way that it affects people. It makes them think. And that's what I'm trying to do, is trying to move people, trying to make them think. If I can make somebody go, wow, if I can make somebody go, huh, I never thought of it that way, then you know what? I've probably succeeded. And so moving on to that, this is earlier this year. This was in April, and it was taken in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I was very lucky that I got to spend some time with a mom and two, actually three cubs. There are only two in this image, but there's a third out of frame. And it was kind of a funny thing because I found myself standing there. I would be watching, crowd would form, crowd would disperse, crowd would form, crowd would disperse. And every time that the crowd formed, there was a ranger who would come in and he would kind of supervise the crowd. And then as the crowd dispersed, he would disappear and he would leave me alone with a mother and three cubs, four brown or black bears. And I've been trying ever since to figure out, did I just seem like a responsible person, or did I just look delicious? And maybe I could be fed to the bears to salve their appetite. In any case, what is this image about? It's really about interaction. And the interaction between the mother and the two cubs is what makes or breaks it, in my opinion. And I will throw in one of my last gigs. I was the Nature First North America Ambassador Coordinator. I am no longer in that role, but just sort of hearkening back to it, I got a lot of questions about how I got so close to the bears to take this photo. And the answer is I did not. I took it on a 600 millimeter lens, used a 50 megapixel camera, and then I cropped extensively. And that's how I got down to that. So Nature First is all about responsible practices in photography, and that is my spiel on that one. I saw people trying to take photos of black bears with cell phones and with wide angle lenses and try to get close to get that close up like this. You can't do it. The lens I used for this is so big, I call it the rocket ship. And I joke about NASA sending it into space. On the other hand, flip it around, get into things that are a lot smaller. And we've got the fuzzy bee. And if you remember the Winnie the Pooh cartoons, Winnie the Pooh would often be found under his shelves with a pot of honey poured all over his head. And he's just sitting there with his head sometimes stuck in the pot of honey. And to me, something about this image with the bee just really seemed kind of in that same spirit, where you have the bee now with its head stuck in the flower, and it's just like that pot of honey over Winnie the Pooh's head. And this, of course, is the image that you saw at the very beginning. This was the title screen image, this time without text all over it. And the thing that's unique to me about this image, the cherry blossoms in DC have been photographed a million times. And one of the things I'm always trying to do is avoid taking the same photo that somebody else has already taken. It's hard to do because everything's been photographed a million times, but I always want to try and get something unique. So I went out after a drizzly rain had fallen and it was still cloudy and the lighting was not very good, frankly. But it gives you the raindrops that you can see on the flowers there. Those aren't dust spots, those are raindrops. And I really I like the look of that. And then on top of that, I was able to do something with the light that actually made me very happy, where even though it was pretty difficult light to work with, I like the way that this image seems to suggest something about the delicacy of the blossoms themselves. And if you'll notice, this is actually, it's actually upside down, which is intentional. And this is a set of blossoms with the focus placed at the one that's furthest back. And the idea there is to make that one emerging the focal point, and then blur out the background, let the focus gradually fall off the ones in the foreground, and make that one near the center the focal point. Or a slightly different way of taking a photo, this is desert lavender from Joshua Tree National Park in California. Again, with the macro lens, up close, all about the stamens, about this feeling of the flower trying to reach out and come out of the photo. And it's almost, almost dreamlike, I think, in the way that the focus starts to fall off as you look further and further into the flower. And then you've got the plant behind it, which is even more out of focus. And in parts of it, in fact, it's just completely blown out and completely gone. Back closer to home, this is actually the Potomac River. One of the other things that I've got going on, a local art gallery has approached me about displaying my work there. So this is one of the images that I submitted to them, and they're now in the process of going through whatever formal steps they do. But this is the Potomac River, and the colors here are very deliberately not the natural colors. I often hear from people about, they tell me that, oh, a photo is supposed to be this thing that shows you exactly what's in front of you. And I'm always a little bit puzzled by that, because I've never seen a photograph that was capable of doing that. So take a look around you right now, look around the room, and tell me where the edge of the frame is. And there isn't one. Just wherever you look, there's more of the world. So a lot of what we as photographers do is almost like slicing a cake. And we say, okay, I'm going to slice this little piece of cake or this little piece of the world out, and that's what I'm going to show and focus on for you. So I don't think it's possible to get just the real world. And the question that I ask people, and I'll ask it again and come back to it later, is this question of, okay, so yes, this is not exactly how it appeared in real life. I've made the colors much more vibrant. I gave it a hue that kind of reminds me of an exhibit I saw in Enlightenment era paintings. But have I hidden the truth? Have I somehow concealed or changed the truth? Is this image a lie? Or have I shown you something that otherwise would have been hidden? And I like to think that with photography, as in other types of art, it's about communication. It's about the message. It's about, what is this photo about? My mantra. And well, when we alter the colors like this, or we process it in any way, we're not hiding anything. We're revealing what we want to communicate, what we want to see. And so quite candidly, I will fairly often change the colors, especially in my images, just to try and bring that out, because there's always that idea of what is this about? And of course, I often get asked about black and white too. I love black and white. But the reason that I am so fond of black and white isn't because I like the lack of color. It's because I'm fascinated by color. And speaking of changing it and using it to try and excuse me, to try and bring out and show whatever it is that you are trying to show. Well, one of the things you can do with color is you can desaturate it, you can take it away. And if you desaturate it completely, then you are left with what's called black and white. This is a tree in Joshua Tree National Park in California. I was there in December of last year. And it really, the coloring sort of obscures what this image is really meant to be. I want people to look at the shape of the tree and the way it almost, it's like it's reaching up to the sky. And there's something about its shape that makes me think of a dancer. And I want people to see that. I don't want them to look at the variations of color. You know, the short answer and the short way of describing this, I guess, is to say that simply color sometimes gets in the way. And black and white has this really great way of just kind of cutting through the obstructions and getting straight to the heart of things. So I like black and white. I use it fairly often. This was on the road to Death Valley. Funny story about this trip. I'm going to Death Valley National Park, one of the driest places in the world. I have always joked that I haven't really started working on photography until I've gotten muddy. And I figured, okay, I'm going to go to the driest place on earth and I am not going to get muddy. So you can probably guess what happened. Yes, indeed, I found the one and only free-flowing water source for probably 50 miles in any direction and got muddy in it. But be that as it may, this is, I call it the long, lonely road. And this is something that I had to fuss with quite a bit. I wanted to have the vast empty space. And I wanted to have the call box because those are things that you just don't see that often. And seeing that here tells you something about just how lonely this road really is, because there is no cell reception out there. You are, the only places that I've seen anywhere remotely comparable are some of the places in Alaska and northern Canada where, again, 2-lane roads, just like here, but you may not see someone for an hour or more, another car or anything else. And this, I wanted to convey that loneliness. Now, the problem I had over and over again was the shadow from the call box. And I don't know if you can see my cursor here. I'm tracing out where the shadow actually goes. And I kept finding call boxes where the road would curve in one direction, and I didn't have the luxury of waiting for the light. But I finally found this one that was close. And so I just sat there and waited. And eventually the sun moved the shadow into where it could sort of blend in with cracks in the pavement there. And that was the effect that I wanted to get. So I was very happy once I finally managed to do that. I don't know how many are familiar with the work of Robert Adams. There is an exhibit of his work right now at the National Art Gallery. It's called American Silence. There is also a book of the exhibit. It's the exhibition catalog that you can get from Aperture Press, or you can get it from the National Art Gallery's book store, which is available online. But the show is full of these images that are showing silent, almost deserted parts of America. And a lot of it sort of shows the decay of old things. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of wabi-sabi, which is a Japanese idea that basically says that sometimes things' imperfections are what perfect it. And a lot of Robert Adams' images reminds me of that concept. And so why do I mention Robert Adams? Because I look at this image and I go, this is my impression of Robert Adams. This has, the space, it's got the decor. Hopefully it tells us something about what used to be and what really is no more. Something about the world that's changed. And indeed, that whole idea of wabi-sabi, to me, that's a big part of what makes this image work. And kind of a similar idea. This is in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Right underneath the train station is this area. It's held up by arches. And it's basically full of junk. And it's used as a storage area. It's barred off. I was actually shooting between the bars here. And it's all about the interplay between light and the subject matter and the shadow. And really, in real life, this place is junk. It's full of trash. But I hope and I think I was able to give it a slightly, or maybe not so slight, but a better look, and sort of look at it in a new way. And what I'm always saying about this whole idea of sense of wonder and this whole idea about things being beautiful is that there's something of beauty in everything. And it's just a matter of looking for it until we find it. And so I think that I was able to find some of that here and make it, not look like a terrible trash-filled place, even if that's exactly what it is. The COVID memorial in DC had over 600,000 white flags, one for each person in it who died. And it was really one of my early examples of trying to get photos about things. I spent 3 weeks looking at other people's photos of the memorial and looking at maps of the National Mall, figuring out when to be there for the rest and for the best light. Then I went down there and I spent a good 3 hours suffering for my art by drinking slushies. While I sat there and I played with various angles and I waited for the light to be just right. And I came away from those 3 hours of work and this 3 weeks of looking at photos with this one image. And it's an image that's one of the first that I was proud of because of how well the clouds look. I was going for a look where the Washington Monument and everything beyond these first handful of flags would fade into the distance and sort of fall out of focus. And if you look, you can see the people are indistinct and faceless. The Washington Monument is also slightly out of focus. It's a little bit blurred. And indeed, the flags themselves are sharp right up front. And then they gradually get less sharp as they go further and further away. And what is the point of that? Well, the point of that is that we talk about the numbers of people who died of COVID, and the numbers of people who died of COVID are so incredibly high that it's kind of hard to see them. And so I couldn't take a photo that showed the whole thing, but I wanted to take one that communicated that message, while at the same time also communicating a message of hope. So on one level, I like to think that this is a fairly nice photo showing the Washington Monument and some flags. But the deeper meaning there is about just how many people died, how hard it is to see that. And yet at the same time, we have the Washington Monument there. It's a symbol of American pride, and it's meant to show us that we still have hope. And sometimes, we talk about beauty and sense of wonder, and sometimes the most beautiful thing that comes out of terrible events is the consequences of them. where things turn out well and where people learn from them and make things better. And I hope that this image, reflects some of that. Now, again, obviously, this is a manipulation. This is, for some reason, the Gallery Place Chinatown station is wherever I end up, is the place I always end up going to take photos in the DC Metro. This one is black and white, but it is actually my first ever attempt at a composite image. And it is meant to reflect the motion at the same time as the desertedness that happened in the DC Metro. I think that what came out of it, turned out surprisingly well, considering that it was a first attempt at the technique ever. So I'm really happy with the way that we've got the motion blur. The train itself is translucent, so you can see the people back behind there. And I'm especially proud of it because I had to take both of the images that I composited to create this one handheld. The DC subway doesn't allow tripods, so I had to handhold and try and get the same perspective twice. And I failed at that. You can actually see, you can see where I'm pointing here. The second car is actually up a little higher than the first car, but I was able to nevertheless produce a good image. I'm proud of that as well. So this is a marijuana dispensary in Los Angeles, and I was very fascinated by the people standing outside of it and the individual inside of it who, he was always just barely visible. He was sort of hidden behind his mask, and at the same time, most of the time, he was hidden in that doorway there. And this is one of those images in street photography where I wasn't sure if I wanted people to know I was taking a picture. Even though LA is a camera town, people are taking pictures all the time. So I ended up walking around the block several times trying to get just the right image of this scene as I was walking by. And this is one of the ones that came out. And I like to think it shows us something about, the demand for this substance that, whether you agree with it or not, again, agreeing or disagreeing is not the point. But here we have people who are getting to explore it, getting to experience it, getting what at least they think that they need. And to me, I'm happy for them. I kind of worried that some of them might feel like they were doing something wrong, which was why I was concerned about them seeing me take the photo. But of course, it's legal in California, increasingly legal across the US. And, if it helps them, then, I can't help but be happy for them. And I think that's a good thing. And I hope that they get what they need. Of course, I'm not sure I entirely agree with this guy here, but thank God the drugs won. But nevertheless, again, it tells us something about the people and the attitudes that people have. And my guess is that this is written on the back of his jacket in jest. But either way, people are just intriguingly fascinating. And one of the things I'm always looking for when I shoot street photography in particular is that moment of something odd, something different, something that makes you go, And to me, this jacket was one of those things that made me go, So I took the shot. And then this is where I'm going to talk a little more about color and black and white as well, because I'm about to switch back to color photos for the rest of the images I have to share with you. This is a bright red payphone on the streets of downtown LA in front of, as you can see, posters and such. And if I took that color photo and showed it to you. Here's the color image. And it's not that it's a bad image, but it's been said that the art of composition in photography is the art of elimination and simplification. And if I make it black and white like that, well, it has that quality where it cuts through the distractions posed by the color, and it suddenly becomes a much simpler image. And that is why I tend to go for the black and white. I just feel like that way of cutting through, simplifying often helps an image. We're back in DC. People have strange ideas about DC. I hear we're a swamp. It turns out that that is not entirely literally true. But people live here. It's just an ordinary city. Cars go zoom at night. And to me, this was the perfect spot to stop and capture that for a moment. I really enjoyed seeing the cars go by. I sat and watched the traffic for quite a while, and experimented with slow shutter speeds and trying to capture some of those images to show that this is day-to-day city life. But of course, you still have the monuments. This was the same night, and this is the Jefferson Memorial. And really, what is this image about? It's about scale, and it's about how small the humans there walking in front of the Jefferson Memorial actually are. They've got the row of columns in front of them and the row of columns behind them, and the humans are just so much smaller. So the monuments in DC, they have to be, and they are, great places for photography. They are incredibly popular with both tourists and professional photographers. But yet at the same time, people don't necessarily stop and really look at them. And a lot of what I'm doing is simply stopping, looking at things and going, hey, take a second look at this. Look at this closer. Look at it a slightly different way. And that's the way that I try to see things, because those are the moments that make me go, wow, when I see something that isn't the way we usually picture something. But it is something that nevertheless, it's impressive. And it tells us, in this case, about the monumental scale of this memorial. I have a couple that are abstract, or at least more abstract. This is all about the image of a wave coming in. And there's something about the frothing of a wave that has always reminded me of silver, or at least quicksilver, or as it's also known, mercury. And this, to me, captures that look in the way that I was able to freeze the motion of the water. So I don't usually go abstract. Quite honestly, I don't think I'm that good at it, or that I understand abstract photography very well. But nevertheless, this is one of those experiments, and that's how I grow. And along the same lines, well, suffice to say that I have the power to reverse long-term weather trends wherever I go. So this is in Death Valley, California. It is all about the horizontal layers. You're actually looking at the floor of Death Valley. And as you can see, about a third of the way up the screen, there is actually water in the floor of Death Valley. In fact, I was rushing out of there that day because several feet of snow were getting ready to fall on the park in Death Valley. And I was trying to get out of town, or out of the park, before the snow fell. So, yeah, this is, as you can see, if you've seen the news, they haven't quite overcome my weather reversals. So they are still flooding out there, unfortunately. But the layers, left behind as the lake evaporated. That Death Valley was originally the floor of a lake. And they create this stratified appearance that kind of reminds me of when you look at an open cut through the earth. And so I held my camera up and I looked through it and I said, you know, I am not going to be able to get a great landscape photo, typical landscape photo with what I have with me. And I am rushing to get out of town or out of the park before the blizzards hit. But I can get this incredible, series of patterns and experiment and learn something more about the abstract side of photography. So I hope I have shown you some how to go wow and some of the how and why I try to do it. And I do want to leave you with this one thought, that everything is beautiful, but not everyone sees it. And that's attributed to Confucius, or as he's known in China, Kung Fu Tzu. Scholars say it's probably not Confucius, but be that as it may, I think he's right. And then, of course, I have my own little thought about that, which is that as photographers, our gifts is not that we see it all the time, but we see that beautiful thing more often than most people. And so we're able to capture it. So this is me. If you would like to get in touch, please do. I am always happy to hear from people and talk about photography. It is something that, I do for the passion of it, for the art of it. And the only problem is, as you may have seen tonight, if you get me started about talking about photography, I may never shut up. But please feel free to reach out anytime. I am happy to hear from people. And at this point, happy to take any questions.
Quickly, as I'm scanning through here, I don't see one question, but I do have a couple of comments that one, people are thanking you for sharing your presentation and more importantly, your passion for this. You had made a comment that abstracts aren't something that you tend to shoot, and I'm going to say you that you should shoot them more often, because that particular wave, I shoot a lot of waves, and when I say a lot, from where I'm based, there's not a whole lot of beach area, but when I am near water, I will spend a lot of time trying to get a wave, and the one that you shot was amazing. I would love to have had that opportunity to have something like that in my catalog. When I found you, and I perused your website, I hadn't found anything that indicated that you did presentations. A lot of my speakers early on, when I started assembling a list of people I wanted to come and talk, they were working photographers that were either making the rounds at photo clubs or teaching workshops. And I really just didn't want to have a program that just talked to professionals. I wanted to talk to people that were like me, that really enjoyed the art medium, that had something to say other than I took a pretty picture. And that is what I got from you. And earlier you said, oh, I had a little bit of, you didn't know if you were having a bout of butterflies or if you just got excited about your own photos. And I think that that shows through. You love what you're doing, and you are unfortunately in a situation where you've got a lot of time to play. And I don't know if that's an unfortunate situation. I think you should just really envelop yourself into going out and playing as much as you can, because you have stories. And that's what I really loved about your presentation tonight, was the stories that you had about photos that We all walk past a line of people. We've all seen some type of protest, but
Mm.
you're grabbing those moments where people are living their lives and you're creating a story, whether we know if that's really what's happening or not. But your
Mhm.
photos took me into that moment. And for that, I really absolutely enjoyed your presentation. So thank you for coming and sharing what you're doing with us.
Mm.
And I really was excited to hear that you've got, possibly an opportunity to be in a gallery. You've got these interviews that are, when I first spoke to you, you're like, you said it was, I kind of felt, odd that you were getting not a call from me, but basically I'd reached out because all of a sudden things were happening. And
Mhm.
it's really cool to see that. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. It's one of those things that I struggle with, and I feel a lot like Vivian Meyer. And I don't know if people here will know who Vivian Meyer is, but she was a nanny who took street photography, like some of the images that I showed tonight. And she hardly ever showed them to anybody for most of her life. And then when she died, her negatives found their way into the hands of an amateur photographer
Right.
who said, "Oh my God, I have discovered something." And now she's becoming quite famous and very well known and one of my favorite photographers. And the
Yeah.
similarity there is that, I took photos for about 20 years and hardly ever showed them to anybody.
Mhm.
And just last year, it's been about a year and 3 months now, I
Mhm.
started putting them on Instagram and I decided I would just try and say yes to things as they popped up, if anything popped up, and just see what happened. And, there has been a reaction. Like I said, I've got people that are asking me about going to a gallery. I've got publications. I do not look for those things. I do not look for this. You just asked me and I try and say yes, so I did.
Yeah.
But it's overwhelming.
Well, I think there's in my own daily practices is there's a lot of power in saying yes.
Yep.
And eh, don't turn away from that because you just don't know what the next step is until you go that direction. So,
I
all
took the
right,
summer off, got my head straight. Now I'm
good,
in space to say yes more. So,
good.
yeah.
Well, let me close out this session and thank you for coming and talking to a room full of strangers and saying yes to me. Because
My pleasure.
I've learned I can always ask, and if someone says no, that's okay, that's on them. But when they do say yes, I'm going to rope them into something that we can turn into something that can inspire somebody else or just to share a story. And I appreciate your time for doing that. If you'd like to connect with Angela, you can through her website, theplacechangesme.com. And if you're on Instagram, look for her at The Place Changes Me. Next week, Sandy Zalosco joins us from California to present The Salton Sea. It's a conservation project that I think you'll find inspiring. And until next time, go out, create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.